I bought my dream Malibu beach house to finally distance myself from my family and their endless drama. On my very first night there, my mother called with a chilling announcement. "We sold the family home," she declared. "We are moving into your place tomorrow. Your father already decided it is fine." I froze as she delivered the final blow. "If you do not like it, you can pack your bags and find somewhere else to live." My hands shook, but I did not argue. I just smiled and prepared a very special welcome for their arrival. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart toxic family members who tried to take advantage of your success. I am Zuri. I am 33 years old and I spent my entire life playing the scapegoat to my parents, Valerie and Calvin. They are pillars of their local church community, obsessed with social status, and entirely devoted to my younger sister, Chloe. Chloe is the golden child who can do no wrong, especially since she married Cameron, a serial startup founder who has never actually turned a profit. I, on the other hand, built my own wealth from the ground up. I run a highly lucrative boutique venture capital firm, but my family has always dismissed my career as mere internet typing. They have no idea how much power I actually hold. The morning after that unbelievable phone call, I stood in the grand foyer of my new home. The estate was a modern architectural masterpiece with imported Brazilian hardwood floors and massive windows overlooking the Pacific Ocean. I was sipping my morning espresso when the tranquility was shattered by the obnoxious blaring of a car horn. I walked over to the security panel and glanced at the high-resolution monitor. It was my parents in their luxury sport utility vehicle, parked aggressively right against my private security gate. They were not waiting for an invitation. They were demanding entry. I pressed the intercom button and calmly asked if they needed help finding the call box. My mother did not even roll down her window. She just laid on the horn again, a long, continuous blast that echoed through the quiet, exclusive neighborhood. I took a slow, deep breath, maintaining the absolute stillness that had made me so successful in corporate boardrooms. I pressed the gate release and watched the heavy iron doors swing open. The vehicle sped up the long palm-lined driveway and jerked to a halt right in front of the main entrance, parking diagonally across two spaces. I opened the massive custom oak front door before they could ring the bell. Valerie climbed out first. She was dressed impeccably as if she were heading to a Sunday morning church service rather than invading her daughter. She did not offer a greeting. She did not ask how I was doing. She simply popped the trunk and began pulling out her heavy designer luggage. Without a single word, she marched up the stone steps and breezed right past me into the foyer. I watched in mild disbelief as she dragged the hard plastic wheels of her oversized suitcase directly over my imported hardwood floors. She did not even bother to wipe her shoes. She dropped the bags in the center of the entryway with a loud thud and placed her hands on her hips, her eyes scanning the vaulted ceilings and the sweeping ocean view. "I do not know how you afford this lease on your little consulting checks, Zuri." She snapped, her face twisting in a look of profound disgust. "It is entirely too flashy. You know we prefer a more traditional aesthetic. But I suppose we can make it work for the time being." I closed the front door quietly and turned to face her. "Make it work for the time being?" I asked, my voice perfectly level. My father, Calvin, walked in right behind her, carrying two more heavy bags. He dropped them next to my mother and wiped his brow. He looked around the pristine space with an air of complete ownership. "Your mother told you on the phone last night," Calvin said, loosening his collar. "We sold the house back home. The real estate market was right and we needed the liquidity. Cameron has a new financial technology application in development, and his startup desperately needs capital. You know how important it is for us to support your sister. We liquidated our assets to help her family build generational wealth." I stood there processing the sheer audacity of his statement. They had sold the very home I grew up in, the house they had owned for 30 years, just to fund another one of Cameron and his doomed business ventures. Cameron had blown through hundreds of thousands of dollars on terrible ideas over the past 5 years, and my parents had always rushed in to save him because he was the charming white relative who promised them early retirement. And now they had literally rendered themselves homeless to write him another massive check. "So you sold your house," I said smoothly, keeping my expression entirely neutral, And your solution was to just drive up to Malibu and move into mine. Valerie let out a sharp, condescending laugh. It is not your house, Zuri. It is a rental. And frankly, it is entirely too much space for a single woman. You are 33 years old with no husband and no children. What exactly do you need 5 bedrooms for? You only need the guest house out back. We will take the main house. It will be perfect for hosting the church deacon board next month. She walked over to my custom marble kitchen island and ran her finger along the edge, inspecting it for dust. Besides, she added without looking at me, we gave you life. We raised you. The least you can do is offer us a roof over our heads while we help Chloe and Cameron get established. If you have a problem with that, like I said last night, you are more than welcome to pack your bags and find somewhere else to reside. We are not going to tolerate your usual selfish behavior when your sister is relying on us. I looked at my mother, noting the sheer entitlement radiating from her posture. She genuinely believed she had the upper hand. She saw me as the same quiet, compliant girl she used to bully into submission. She did not see the woman who negotiated corporate buyouts for breakfast. She did not realize that I had stopped seeking her validation a decade ago. My father chimed in, walking toward the master hallway. We will take the suite facing the water. I will call the city tomorrow morning to put the utility bills in my name. That way we can make this officially our residence and handle all the mail. It is better to have a man running the paperwork anyway, just in case the landlord tries to raise the rent on you. The corners of my mouth twitched into a small, polite smile. To them, I was just a tenant. A lonely, unmarried woman playing house with a temporary lease. They truly believed they could march in, put an electric bill in their name, and claim squatter rights on a property worth 8 figures. I walked over to the entryway console and picked up a heavy, solid brass keyring. It held the master keys to the entire estate, including the automated pool systems, the wine cellar, and the guest house. I walked back over to my parents and held the keys out to my father. You are absolutely right, Dad, I said, my voice dripping with honeyed compliance. You have always known what is best for the family. If you want to take over the main house, I will not stand in your way. I will pack my things and move my workspace out to the guest house before sunset. Calvin snatched the keys from my hand with a grunt of approval. See, Valerie, he said, turning to my mother. I told you she would eventually learn how to be a team player. All it takes is a little firm guidance. Valerie offered me a tight, insincere smile. Thank you, Zuri. It is good to see you finally putting family first. Now please hurry up and clear your things out of the master bathroom. I want to have this entire house cleansed and organized before Chloe and Cameron arrive. I nodded gracefully, turned on my heel, and walked toward the master suite to pack my overnight bag. My pulse was completely steady. I did not scream, I did not cry, and I certainly did not argue. I gave them exactly what they demanded because I knew a crucial piece of information that would eventually destroy them. Calvin could call the city and put every utility bill in his name. Valerie could invite the entire church congregation over for Sunday brunch. Chloe and Cameron could move in and pretend they were Malibu royalty. But none of that would change the reality of the situation. I did not lease this estate. I bought it outright in cash. And my personal name was nowhere on the deed. The property was legally owned by Obsidian Holdings, a ruthless, heavily armored corporate trust. And I was the sole proprietor, CEO, and managing director of Obsidian Holdings. By handing them those keys, I was not giving up my home. I was simply letting the rats walk willingly into a trap. I packed my designer suits, locked my secure briefcase, and walked out the back door toward the guest house, leaving my parents to celebrate their perceived victory in my living room. They thought they had just conquered me, but they had absolutely no idea who they were really dealing with. I made my way up the floating glass staircase to the master suite with my mother matching me step for step. Valerie did not believe in giving anyone breathing room. She trailed right behind me, running her manicured hands over the custom glass banister and clicking her tongue in disapproval. She was already treating my home like a renovation project she had acquired at a discount. When we stepped into the master bedroom, her eyes widened for a fraction of a second at the sheer scale of it. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed panoramic view of the Pacific Ocean, while the private wrap-around balcony was bathed in the warm, golden light of the late afternoon sun. But Valerie would never openly admit to being impressed by anything I possessed. She quickly masked her awe with a harsh scoff. "This room is entirely too cold, Zuri," she declared, crossing her arms over her chest. "It lacks a welcoming spirit. Chloe and Cameron are going to need a much warmer environment when they move their things in. They have been through so much stress with Cameron losing his last business. I need you to clear out your clothes and whatever else is in that closet by sunset. I have an elder from our church coming over to burn sage and cleanse the energy in this space before your sister arrives. We need to completely wash away this heavy, isolating atmosphere you carry around with you." I walked over to my closet and pulled out a single black leather overnight bag. I did not argue. I did not defend my interior design choices or remind her that she was standing in my personal sanctuary. I simply unzipped the bag and began folding a few tailored suits and basic essentials. My silence irritated them more than any argument ever could. My father Calvin appeared in the doorway, leaning his heavy frame against the custom molding. He watched me fold a silk blouse with a look of profound disappointment. "That sullen attitude is exactly why you are 33 and alone, Zuri," Calvin stated, his voice booming in the quiet room. "You always isolate yourself. You never know how to compromise or share your blessings. Your sister and her husband are building a legacy, and instead of celebrating that, we can provide them with this beautiful property. You are pouting like a teenager. You need to learn how to be a team player like your sister. Chloe knows how to lean on her family. She knows how to keep a man happy. You could learn a lot from her if you stopped acting so superior all the time." I placed a pair of shoes into my bag and zipped it shut. I looked at my father, maintaining a completely neutral expression. It was fascinating to watch them twist reality. They had just bullied their way into a Malibu estate, demanding the primary suite for their golden child and her failing white husband, and yet I was the one being lectured about sharing blessings. In their minds, my role was to be the permanent safety net, the silent workhorse who existed only to facilitate Chloe's happiness. I grabbed my laptop bag and slung it over my shoulder. "If you need anything else, Dad, you know where to find me," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly polite. "I will leave you both to get settled." I walked past them out of the master suite and down the stairs, heading out the back patio doors toward the guest house. The ocean breeze hit my face instantly, clearing the suffocating tension my parents always brought with them. The guest house sat at the far end of the property, separated from the main house by a massive saltwater infinity pool and a lush privacy hedge of manicured tropical plants. From the outside, it looked like a simple, elegant cabana designed for weekend visitors. But looks were highly deceiving. I unlocked the heavy reinforced steel door with a biometric thumbprint scan. I stepped inside, and the lights automatically engaged, revealing the true nature of the space. It was not a guest house. It was the West Coast Operational Command Center for Obsidian Holdings. The walls were lined with soundproof acoustic paneling. A massive L-shaped desk dominated the center of the room, equipped with 4 ultra-high-definition curved monitors and an encrypted server rack humming quietly in the corner. This was where I orchestrated digital crisis campaigns and managed hostile takeovers for some of the most powerful corporations in the country. This was my true sanctuary. I set my bag down on the leather sofa and sat at the command desk. I woke up the monitors with a keystroke and immediately brought up the proprietary security software I had installed throughout the estate. I had military-grade cameras discreetly positioned in the common areas, the hallways, the exterior perimeter, and the wine cellar. I clicked on the feed for the main kitchen and tapped the key to activate the audio. On the screen, I watched Valerie and Calvin rummaging through my custom cabinetry. Valerie opened the Sub-Zero refrigerator and let out a delighted gasp. She reached into the chilled beverage drawer and pulled out a bottle of my Louis Roederer Cristal champagne, a bottle that retailed for over $400. "Look at this," Valerie said, holding the bottle up to the light. She is drinking imported champagne while complaining about helping her own flesh and blood. The selfishness of this girl is just astounding. Calvin grabbed 2 crystal flutes from the glass cabinet and set them on the marble island. "Pop it open, Valerie. We deserve a toast. We practically sacrificed our entire retirement to pay off Cameron's legal fees and keep Chloe smiling." It is only right that we get to enjoy the fruits of our labor. This house is a godsend. Once Cameron gets his new crypto project off the ground, he will buy us a place twice this size. Until then, we will just make ourselves comfortable here. Zuri does not need all this luxury anyway. She works too much to even appreciate it. I watched my parents clink their glasses together, laughing as they drank my vintage champagne in my kitchen, plotting how to turn my property into a playground for my sister and her parasitic husband. They genuinely believed they had won. They thought they had successfully manipulated the system, putting me in my place while elevating the golden child. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, steepling my fingers together. I felt absolutely no anger. Anger is a useless emotion that clouds judgment and leads to sloppy mistakes. I only felt a cold, calculating clarity. I was going to let them get completely comfortable. I was going to let them invite Chloe and Cameron into the house. I was going to let them unpack their bags and envision their grand future. And then I was going to dismantle their entire reality brick by brick. Suddenly, my personal cell phone vibrated on the desk. The screen lit up with a high-priority fraud alert from a private banking institution. I picked up the device and opened the secure banking application. It was an alert regarding a joint checking account I had not actively used in over a decade. It was the simple student account my father had set up for me when I was a teenager to help me deposit my wages from my first high school job. Calvin had required himself to be listed as a joint account holder back then, insisting he needed to monitor my spending to teach me financial responsibility. I had long since moved my massive corporate wealth into heavily guarded offshore trusts and encrypted corporate accounts. But I had kept that old childhood account open with a modest balance of around $20,000 simply out of nostalgia and convenience for small automated subscriptions. I stared at the glowing notification on my screen. The alert detailed an attempted point-of-sale transaction in the amount of $18,500. The merchant was listed as an ultra-luxury furniture showroom located in Beverly Hills. I looked back at the security monitor. Calvin was standing in my kitchen, holding his cell phone to his ear with one hand and sipping my champagne with the other. I turned up the audio feed. "Yes, I am trying to process the payment right now," Calvin was saying into his phone, his tone carrying that pompous authority he always used with service workers. "I need the Italian leather sectional and the matching dining set delivered to the Malibu address by tomorrow morning. My daughter and son-in-law are moving in, and the current furniture in the house is completely unacceptable. Yes, run the card again. It should go through. It is a joint account, and I am the primary signer." He was trying to drain my childhood savings account to buy luxury furniture for Cameron and Chloe. He did not even bother to ask. He simply assumed that because his name was still technically on the old high school account, he had the divine right to liquidate my money to fund my sister's lifestyle. He thought he could steal from me in broad daylight and mask it as parental authority. I did not call him. I did not march into the main house to demand an explanation. I did not shed a single tear over the betrayal. I simply looked at the fraud alert on my phone. The banking application presented two options on the screen: approve transaction or report fraud and freeze account. I took a slow sip of my herbal tea, enjoying the absolute silence of my command center. I watched my father on the security feed growing increasingly frustrated as the customer service representative on the other end of the line clearly informed him that his payment was stalling. With one deliberate tap of my manicured index finger, I hit report fraud and freeze account. The screen instantly flashed a confirmation banner locking down the funds permanently and flagging Calvin's identity in the banking system for unauthorized access attempts. On the security monitor, I watched Calvin pull the phone away from his ear, his face contorting in confusion and sudden panic. He frantically tapped his screen, trying to reload the mobile banking page, but he was already locked out. The game had officially started. The morning sun had barely crested over the Pacific Ocean when the obnoxious grinding of heavy air brakes shattered the quiet sanctuary of my Malibu estate. I sat at the command desk inside the guest house sipping my matcha and watching the high-definition security feed on my monitors. A massive moving truck had just parked illegally across my pristine driveway. Right behind it pulled up a sleek white Tesla. The doors of the Tesla opened, and my younger sister Chloe stepped out. She was draped in an oversized cashmere cardigan and designer sunglasses, playing the part of the exhausted wealthy wife to perfection. From the driver's seat emerged her husband Cameron. He wore a quarter-zip fleece vest over a plain t-shirt, the universal uniform of a tech founder who had never actually written a line of profitable code or generated a single dime of revenue. They walked up my driveway without so much as a glance toward the guest house where I was staying. Cameron stopped near the main entrance, resting his hands on his hips as he surveyed the exterior of my property. The audio feed from the front porch camera picked up his voice with crystal clarity. "Not bad," Cameron smirked, nodding at the modern architecture. "We will need to upgrade the aesthetic, though. It is a little too urban right now. Needs more of a minimalist coastal vibe." Too urban. I let out a soft, sharp laugh. My property was a masterpiece of contemporary design featured in architectural magazines for its sleek lines and imported materials. But to Cameron, the mere presence of his black-in-laws claiming residence here meant the space needed a cultural whitewashing to fit his refined tastes. It was a classic Cameron microaggression dropped casually into the morning air. I watched on the screen as they instructed the movers to start unloading boxes. I realized I had left a few physical asset portfolios in the primary ocean view office on the second floor. These were highly confidential acquisition targets for Obsidian Holdings. I locked my workstation and took the short walk across the pool deck to the main house. The glass doors were wide open, letting in the ocean breeze and the chaotic shouting of the movers. I stepped inside the foyer, navigating around cardboard boxes poorly labeled with Cameron's name. I walked up the floating glass staircase to my office. What I saw when I reached the landing made my blood run entirely cold, though my face remained a mask of absolute stone. Cameron was standing in the center of my custom-built office. He had already unplugged my secondary monitors and shoved my expensive equipment carelessly to the side of the desk. Worse, he was actively grabbing my leather-bound business folders and tossing them into the hallway like garbage. The heavy binders hit the hardwood floor with a sharp thud, pages of redacted corporate strategies spilling out near my feet. I knelt down slowly, gathering the documents into a neat pile. Chloe walked down the hall holding a cup of coffee she had just brewed, using my espresso machine. She stopped looking down at me as I picked up my property. She did not offer to help. Instead, she crossed her arms over her chest, shifting her weight to one leg, with an air of absolute superiority. "Do not look at us like that, Zuri," Chloe said, her voice dripping with that familiar, sickeningly sweet condescension. "Dad said you are living here rent-free since they took over the lease. The least you can do is give up the office without making a scene. Cameron is under a lot of stress since his last app failed. He needs a dedicated space for his crypto trading headquarters." I stopped moving. I looked up at my sister holding my corporate portfolios against my chest. My mind processed her words with algorithmic precision. My parents had not just invited Chloe and Cameron to live in my house. They had fabricated an entire alternate reality to stroke their own egos. Calvin and Valerie had told their golden child that they were the ones who secured this multi-million-dollar lease. They had painted themselves as the wealthy, benevolent patriarch and matriarch, rescuing Chloe and Cameron from their latest financial ruin. And to make the lie perfectly believable, they cast me in the role they had always assigned to me. The struggling, unmarried older sister who needed her parents' charity just to keep a roof over her head. They were using my success, my money, and my property to play savior to the white son-in-law who kept bleeding our family dry. I stood up gracefully, brushing a speck of dust from my tailored trousers. The urge to correct her, to scream that I owned every single square inch of the ground she was standing on, was fleeting. Anger is an emotion for people who lack leverage. I had all the leverage in the world. I let the lie breathe. I let it fill the room, expanding their egos to the point of bursting. "You are right," I said smoothly. My tone was so perfectly even that Chloe actually looked taken aback. I would not want to add to Cameron's stress. Building a crypto empire from scratch requires a lot of focus. "I will take my little files out to the guest house and leave you both to get settled." Chloe smiled, her shoulders relaxing as she took a sip of her coffee. I am glad you are finally understanding how family works, Zuri. Mom and Dad sacrificed a lot to get this place for us. They sold their house so Cameron could have a proper launch pad. Do not ruin it with your usual jealousy. Just stay out of his way while he works. I offered a polite nod, turned around, and walked back down the staircase carrying my folders. As I reached the ground floor, I heard Cameron's heavy footsteps echoing behind me. He had come downstairs to inspect the rest of his new kingdom. I paused near the kitchen island, adjusting my documents, and watched him out of the corner of my eye. Cameron wandered toward the formal dining room, but stopped dead in his tracks in the hallway. He was staring directly at the glass-enclosed, climate-controlled wine cellar, built seamlessly into the wall beneath the floating stairs. Inside rested over 100 bottles of rare vintage wines I had acquired from private auctions around the world. The cellar was secured by a heavy steel handle and a digital biometric lock. Cameron stepped closer, pressing his face against the tempered glass. His eyes widened with pure, unadulterated greed as he read the labels on the bottles. He reached out and jiggled the steel handle, aggressively testing the resistance of the lock. He did not know I was watching him, calculating exactly how far his entitlement would push him before the day was over. I stepped out of the guest house late that afternoon to retrieve a secure hard drive from my vehicle. The salty Pacific breeze usually cleared my mind, but today the driveway felt suffocating. Before I could even reach my car, Chloe materialized from the shadow of the main house patio. She marched directly into my path, wearing an overpriced designer tracksuit she undoubtedly purchased using our father's rapidly depleting credit line. She planted her hands on her hips, blocking my way with the same arrogant posture she had perfected since childhood. Cameron is hosting a seed-round dinner for his new investors tomorrow night, Chloe announced. Her tone was not asking a question. It was issuing a directive. We need you to cover the catering. I already picked out a private chef who specializes in fusion cuisine. It will be 5 courses. He needs a deposit of $6,000 by tonight. I looked at her, my expression completely blank. I am not funding a dinner party for your husband, I said smoothly. Chloe's jaw dropped in exaggerated offense. You are unbelievable. You sit out here in your little back house hoarding your money while Cameron is trying to build generational wealth for this family. You love talking about supporting the community, but the second your own sister needs a check to secure our future, you turn your back. The sheer delusion in her voice was almost impressive. She was standing in the driveway of my multi-million-dollar estate, lecturing me about generational wealth generated by a white man who had already tanked 3 consecutive startups. A man who required my parents to sell their lifelong home just to cover his massive legal debts. Before I could point out that glaring hypocrisy, the heavy oak front door of the main house swung open. Our mother Valerie hurried down the driveway, her heels clicking aggressively against the pavement. She wrapped a protective arm around Chloe and shot me a look of absolute venom. Zuri, stop stressing your sister, Valerie snapped. Her blood pressure is high enough dealing with your constant attitude. You have always been like this, always causing problems and refusing to support your own blood. I am not causing a problem, Valerie, I replied, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. I am simply declining to finance a private chef for a man who does not have a job. Valerie stepped forward, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. You have always been jealous of Chloe having a husband to take care of her. That is your problem. You are bitter because you cannot keep a man, so you want to ruin this for her. Do not ruin this opportunity just because you are miserable. Cameron is the man of the house now, and you will show him respect. I looked at my mother's protective stance, shielding the golden child who was actively destroying her retirement. A husband to take care of her, I asked, tilting my head slightly. You mean the husband you and Dad just rendered yourselves homeless for? Valerie gasped, clutching her chest as if I had physically struck her. Chloe let out an outraged noise, but I did not stay to entertain their performance. I turned on my heel, retrieved my hard drive from the car, and walked back to the guest house, locking the reinforced steel door behind me. I let them stand in the driveway, drowning in their own manufactured outrage. Hours later, the estate was draped in the quiet darkness of the Malibu night. I sat in my command center, surrounded by the soft hum of encrypted servers and the glow of 4 curved, ultra-high definition monitors. I was deep into reviewing a hostile takeover strategy for a corporate client when my private tablet lit up with a silent red notification. The perimeter alarm had not been tripped, but an internal sensor had caught movement. The silent corporate alarm inside the main house was actively registering a breach. I dragged the security application to my primary monitor and expanded the video feed. The 4K night vision cameras provided a crystal clear view of the first floor hallway. There was Cameron creeping barefoot across the imported hardwood floors. He wore dark sweatpants and a t-shirt, glancing nervously over his shoulder as he approached the space beneath the floating glass staircase. He stopped dead in his tracks, staring at the glass-enclosed, climate-controlled wine cellar. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and watched the live broadcast. The wine cellar was secured by a heavy steel handle and a digital biometric lock, but Cameron clearly thought he was dealing with standard residential security. I watched him pull a small metallic tension wrench and a picking tool from his pocket. He knelt down on the floor, his face pressed close to the locking mechanism, sweating profusely as he worked the metal tools into the keyhole override. He thought he was being stealthy. He had no idea that the camera positioned directly above him was currently scanning his face, matching his biometrics to his criminal profile, and logging every single second of his intrusion. After 3 agonizing minutes of twisting the tools, the heavy steel lock finally gave way with a soft click. Cameron exhaled a heavy breath of relief, wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, and pulled the glass door open. A rush of chilled air escaped the cellar, but Cameron ignored it. He stepped inside, running his hands over the meticulously organized wooden racks. He bypassed the standard bottles and went straight for the premium reserve shelf. I watched in high definition as his fingers closed around a very specific bottle. It was a rare vintage Bordeaux easily valued at over $5,000. It was a bottle I had acquired at a private auction in Paris, intended to celebrate the eventual public offering of Obsidian Holdings. Cameron cradled the bottle against his chest, a smug, entitled grin spreading across his face. He carefully closed the glass door behind him, making sure it latched, and crept back down the hallway toward the master suite he had stolen from me. On my computer screen, the security software operated flawlessly. A green confirmation bar flashed across the monitor. The system automatically generated a time-stamped video file logging the exact value of the stolen asset. The text on the screen categorized the event perfectly: felony trespass and theft recorded. I did not sound the estate alarms. I did not march into the main house to demand my property back. I simply saved the encrypted video file to a secure cloud server, adding it to the rapidly growing dossier labeled for Cameron's impending destruction. I picked up my mug of chamomile tea, took a slow, satisfying sip, and went to sleep. Sunday morning arrived with a violent pounding on my reinforced steel door. It was exactly 6 in the morning. I was already awake, sitting at my command desk, reviewing the high-definition footage of Cameron stealing my vintage wine. I saved the final encrypted file to my external server, just as the pounding escalated. "Zuri, open this door right now!" Valerie shouted, her voice cutting through the thick marine layer of the Malibu morning. "I know you are awake in there. We have 50 people coming from the church this afternoon, and I need this pool deck power washed before the pastor arrives." I calmly locked my monitors and walked over to the door. I pressed the intercom button so my voice would broadcast through the exterior speaker. "I am not cleaning your pool deck, Valerie," I said, my tone perfectly level. "I am working. Hire a service if you want the concrete scrubbed." I hit the button to mute the intercom and turned away. The silence lasted for exactly 3 seconds before a heavy fist slammed against the doorframe. My father had joined the assault. "You will respect your mother!" Calvin bellowed, his deep voice vibrating through the thick door. "We did not raise you to be this arrogant just because you do some internet typing. You live under our roof now, and you will contribute to this household. Your sister is inside preparing a marinade, and Cameron is busy setting up his presentation for the investors. Get out here and do your part." I stood in the center of my command center and simply smiled. I reached out and engaged the secondary biometric deadbolt. The heavy mechanical click echoed loudly enough for them to hear it on the porch. I poured myself a fresh cup of Ethiopian dark roast coffee and went back to my screens. They could scream at a steel door all morning if they wanted to. I had corporate acquisitions to finalize. By noon, the estate was completely transformed. From my tinted windows, I watched the invasion unfold. Valerie had turned my serene oceanfront property into a loud, chaotic spectacle. The heavy scent of barbecue smoke drifted over the saltwater infinity pool, mingling with the ocean breeze. Gospel and old-school rhythm and blues blasted from the portable speakers Calvin had dragged onto the patio. Members of their church congregation milled about in their Sunday best, marveling at the architecture and sipping sweet tea. Valerie was in her element holding court near the outdoor kitchen. She wore a bright floral sundress and a wide-brimmed hat, playing the role of the blessed matriarch. I watched her wave her hands expansively, pointing out the imported tile and the custom fire pits as if she had selected them herself. Cameron was equally busy over by the cabana setting up a makeshift cigar lounge for his impending guests. He wore a crisp white linen shirt and expensive loafers, acting the part of the triumphant tech mogul. Chloe trailed behind him carrying a tray of expensive cheeses, fawning over his every word. They were a perfect portrait of unearned entitlement. I stepped out of the guest house around 1 o'clock, intending to retrieve a document from my car. The moment my foot hit the pavement, Valerie detached herself from a group of church elders and marched directly toward me. Her smile was tight, and her eyes were furious. "Since you refused to help this morning, you can make yourself useful now," she hissed, keeping her voice low so the congregation would not hear. "Cameron has very important venture capitalists arriving any minute. These are wealthy men, Zuri. They drive expensive cars. I need you to move your little sedan out of the gated driveway and park it down on the public street. We need to leave the secure parking open for people who actually generate wealth for this family." I looked past her shoulder. My understated black sedan was parked neatly in its designated spot near the garage. It was a customized bulletproof vehicle with a twin-turbo engine, but to Valerie, it was just a symbol of my supposedly mediocre life. "You want me to park on the Pacific Coast Highway so Cameron's friends can use my driveway?" I asked, ensuring I had the directive perfectly clear. "Do not play games with me today," Valerie snapped. "Yes. Move your car outside the gates immediately. Consider it your punishment for disrespecting your father this morning. And stay out of the way when the investors arrive. We do not need your negative energy ruining Cameron's networking opportunities." I nodded slowly. "You are absolutely right, Valerie," I said, my voice smooth and compliant. "I would hate to get in the way of Cameron's big financial breakthrough. I will move my car to the street right now." Valerie looked momentarily confused by my lack of resistance, but she quickly recovered her haughty posture. "See to it that you do," she muttered, turning back to greet a group of arriving deacons. I walked to my car, unlocked the doors, and slipped into the driver's seat. I started the engine and slowly drove down the long, palm-lined driveway. As I approached the main security gates, they swung open automatically, recognizing my vehicle's transponder. I pulled out of my own private estate and parked my car 2 blocks down on the public street just as my mother had ordered. I sat in the driver's seat, turned off the engine, and pulled out my secure tablet. I opened the Obsidian Holdings property management portal. As the legal owner of the estate, I had complete administrative control over the community guidelines and the private road access. The driveway and the fire lanes inside the gates were strictly regulated by local zoning laws. With a few swift keystrokes, I accessed the parking enforcement protocols for my specific address. I activated a zero-tolerance towing policy. I digitally authorized a highly aggressive local towing company to immediately impound any vehicle parked inside the gates without a registered guest pass. I bypassed the standard warning period and set the enforcement to trigger instantly upon arrival. The towing company received an automated dispatch order authorizing them to clear the private property of all unregistered vehicles. I locked the tablet and placed it back in my bag. I walked leisurely back up the street toward my estate. By the time I reached the open security gates, 3 flashy sports cars had already pulled into the driveway. A bright red Ferrari, a silver Porsche, and a matte black Lamborghini were parked haphazardly across the stone pavers, taking up 2 spaces each. These were Cameron's investors. A group of loud, arrogant tech brothers who had come to be entertained by a man who had no actual product to sell. I slipped quietly past them and retreated to my guest house, locking the door behind me. I settled into my ergonomic chair and brought up the exterior security cameras. I wanted a front row seat for the show. Outside, Cameron was greeting his guests with overly enthusiastic handshakes and loud laughter. He ushered the 3 men toward the backyard, offering them premium cigars and pointing toward the wine cellar inside the main house. I noticed he looked incredibly smug, undoubtedly planning to serve them the stolen vintage Bordeaux he had pilfered the night before. Meanwhile, Valerie was circulating among the church members, accepting their praise and basking in the manufactured glory of her fake retirement home. She kept glancing toward Cameron and his wealthy friends, her chest puffed out with pride. She truly believed she had orchestrated the perfect afternoon. She believed she had put me in my place and secured a lucrative future for her favorite daughter. I checked the time on my digital clock. The towing company in this district was notoriously efficient, especially when a corporate account authorized immediate impoundment with guaranteed payment. They operated like a precision military unit, swooping in and removing luxury vehicles before the owners even knew what hit them. I leaned back and interlaced my fingers, keeping my eyes fixed on the driveway monitors. The church choir was singing a joyful hymn in the backyard. Chloe was laughing loudly at a joke one of the tech brothers made. Calvin was busy flipping expensive cuts of meat on my custom outdoor grill. They were all completely oblivious to the fact that I had just weaponized their own arrogance against them. I took a slow, steady breath and waited for the heavy diesel engines of the tow trucks to arrive. The afternoon sun beat down on the Malibu coastline, casting a golden glow over my infinity pool. The air was thick with the scent of smoked brisket, garlic butter, shrimp, and charred hickory wood. My mother had spared no expense transforming my pristine outdoor living space into a chaotic, sprawling church cookout. Gospel music blasted from the premium surround sound speakers I had installed just last month. Deacons in linen shirts laughed loudly near the outdoor kitchen, while the choir director organized a game of spades on my manicured lawn. I sat quietly at a wrought iron patio table near the edge of the water, wearing a simple tailored silk sundress. I held a glass of sparkling water, observing the spectacle with the detached fascination of a scientist watching a predictable social experiment. Pastor Davis, a tall man with a booming voice and a penchant for dramatic pauses, stood up near the fire pit and clinked a silver spoon against his glass of sweet tea. The lively chatter of 50 congregants immediately died down. He raised his hands, commanding the attention of the entire yard. "Let us bow our heads and give praise," Pastor Davis announced, his voice echoing across the patio. "We are gathered here today to celebrate the abundant blessings bestowed upon Calvin and Valerie. The Lord has seen their decades of faithful service and rewarded them with this magnificent coastal estate. It is a testament to the power of prayer and righteous living that they can now enjoy their golden years in such a breathtaking home. Let this property be a beacon of generational wealth for their family." A chorus of amens rippled through the crowd. My father puffed out his chest, adjusting his polo shirt with a look of supreme, arrogant satisfaction. My mother stepped forward, placing a hand over her heart, playing the role of the humble matriarch to absolute perfection. She looked out over the crowd, ensuring she had every single person's undivided attention before her eyes locked directly onto mine. "God is good," she declared, her voice carrying a sharp theatrical clarity designed to pierce right through me. "He has blessed us so abundantly that we are even able to extend our grace to those who are struggling. We let Zuri stay in the back unit out of charity since her little online business isn't stable. It brings a mother's heart joy to provide a safety net when her children fail to launch properly." The silence that followed her statement was heavy and deeply uncomfortable. The church members shifted in their seats, casting pitying glances in my direction. Sister Patterson, a woman who had known me since I was a teenager, walked past my table and offered me a plate of potato salad with a deeply sympathetic sigh. "Keep praying, child," she whispered, leaning down. "The Lord will find a path for you eventually, just like He did for your sister." I did not flinch. I did not defend my business or scream that I owned the very ground they were standing on. I simply smiled politely, accepted the plate, and took a slow sip of my water. Let them believe the fantasy. The higher they built this pedestal, the more devastating the drop would be. Across the deck, Chloe was holding court, surrounded by a group of younger church members. She was clinging to Cameron's arm, ensuring everyone knew she was the wife of a supposed visionary. Cameron stood there in his crisp linen shirt, swirling a glass of my stolen vintage wine, looking incredibly smug. Cameron's new app is going to completely revolutionize finance. Chloe bragged, her voice intentionally loud enough to reach my table. He is currently finalizing a massive seed round today. It takes a brilliant analytical mind to navigate the tech sector. Zuri tried doing some internet consulting on her own, but you really need a white man with Cameron's pedigree to secure actual corporate funding. He is carrying the future of this entire family. Cameron chuckled modestly, patting Chloe's hand. It is just about knowing the right people, he added smoothly. My lead investors are driving up from Silicon Valley right now. They manage portfolios worth hundreds of millions. You have to speak their language to get them to open their checkbooks. Right on cue, the heavy iron security gates at the front of the driveway swung open. I had temporarily lifted the digital lockdown explicitly to allow this exact moment to happen. A sleek black Maybach glided up the driveway, followed closely by a dark-tinted Range Rover. The vehicles parked smoothly on the stone pavers. The backyard went quiet as the heavy doors of the Maybach opened. Out stepped Harrison Cole, a notoriously ruthless venture capitalist and executive board member of one of the largest tech conglomerates in Silicon Valley. He was flanked by two equally intimidating associates wearing sharp, tailored suits. They looked entirely out of place at a Sunday church barbecue, radiating a cold corporate energy that instantly shifted the atmosphere of the entire patio. Cameron practically sprinted across the lawn to intercept them. He wiped his sweating palms on his trousers and pasted on a wide, eager smile. He thrust his hand out toward the billionaire executive. Harrison, man, it is so great to see you. Cameron projected loudly, ensuring the pastor. My parents and Chloe were all watching his triumphant moment. Welcome to our home. I have the pitch deck ready inside, and I saved a special bottle of Bordeaux just for us to celebrate the partnership. Harrison Cole did not take Cameron's outstretched hand. He did not even look at Cameron's face. Harrison had stopped dead in his tracks the moment he stepped onto the patio. His sharp, calculating eyes scanned the crowd and locked instantly onto me, sitting quietly at my wrought iron table. I watched the blood completely drain from his face. The rigid posture of the billionaire executive faltered. He recognized the apex predator of the corporate world sitting in a sundress, eating potato salad. He completely ignored Cameron, leaving my brother-in-law standing awkwardly with his hand extended in midair. Harrison bypassed the church elders, bypassed my beaming parents, and walked directly toward my table. His two associates followed closely behind, their expressions mirroring his sudden profound anxiety. When Harrison reached my table, he stopped and bowed his head in a gesture of absolute, unmistakable deference. Ms. Williams, Harrison said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly dead, silent backyard. I sincerely apologize for the intrusion. I had absolutely no idea you resided at this estate. I set my glass down slowly, meeting his terrified gaze with cool indifference. Good afternoon, Harrison, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured. I am enjoying a private weekend. I will not take up more than a moment of your time, he said hastily, his voice laced with deep respect and palpable fear. But since I am standing in your presence, I must take this opportunity to thank you personally. Your firm saved my corporation from a massive hostile takeover last quarter. Obsidian Holdings is the absolute only reason I still have a board seat today. The strategy your crisis management team executed was nothing short of brilliant. We owe our entire quarterly survival to you, Ms. Williams. The splashing of the pool filter was suddenly the only sound in the entire yard. The gospel music seemed to have faded into non-existence. My mother stood frozen near the grill, the spatula slipping from her hand and clattering onto the stone deck. My father's mouth hung slightly open, his arrogant posture completely deflated. Chloe stared at Harrison in absolute disbelief, her eyes darting frantically between the billionaire investor and me. Cameron looked as if he was going to be physically ill. His face was a mask of pure panic and incomprehension. The wealthy Silicon Valley executive he had been begging for a financial lifeline was standing in front of the entire congregation, bowing his head and publicly expressing profound gratitude to the sister-in-law Cameron had just dismissed as an unemployed failure. I looked past Harrison and met Cameron's terrified eyes. I offered him a small, lethal smile. "It is always a pleasure to assist competent leadership," Harrison, I said, shifting my gaze back to the executive. "I believe you are here to evaluate a pitch from my sister's husband. Please do not let me interrupt your due diligence. I am very interested to see what kind of business decisions you make today." Harrison swallowed hard, recognizing the subtle but absolute warning in my words. "Yes, of course, Ms. Williams," he replied, stepping back respectfully. "Enjoy your afternoon." He turned around to face Cameron, who was now trembling visibly. The power dynamic in the yard had been completely and violently inverted in less than 60 seconds. The church congregation remained completely paralyzed, staring at me with wide eyes, suddenly realizing that the woman they had been pitying all afternoon was the one holding the keys to the entire kingdom. Cameron let out a high-pitched, frantic laugh that shattered the heavy silence hanging over the patio. He stepped squarely between Harrison and my table, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Harrison, man, I think there is a huge misunderstanding here," Cameron stammered, his face flushing a deep mottled red. "Zuri is my sister-in-law. She just does some freelance consulting. A little internet typing, really. She is basically a low-level customer service rep who probably sat in on one of your board meetings to take notes. She likes to exaggerate her role to make herself feel important." I did not say a word. I simply picked up my fork and took a bite of my potato salad, letting Cameron dig his own grave. Harrison Cole stopped moving. He looked at Cameron as if my brother-in-law were a cockroach that had just crawled out of the pristine pool water. The billionaire executive slowly turned his head, glancing at his two associates who looked equally horrified by Cameron's sheer suicidal stupidity. "A low-level consultant," Harrison repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "Ms. Williams owns Obsidian Holdings. She single-handedly liquidated my primary competitors last year. I do not know what kind of delusional fantasy you are operating under, Cameron, but I do not do business with insecure, ignorant men who disrespect their absolute superiors." Harrison turned his back on Cameron completely. He gave me one final respectful nod. "Have a wonderful afternoon, Ms. Williams. We will be leaving now." "Wait, Harrison, the pitch deck," Cameron pleaded, practically chasing the executive down the driveway. "I have the projections. This app is going to change the market. The only thing you are going to change is your employment status." Harrison called back over his shoulder, not breaking his stride. "My funding is entirely withdrawn. Do not ever contact my office again." The heavy doors of the Maybach slammed shut. The engine purred to life, and the two luxury vehicles rolled smoothly down the street, leaving Cameron standing alone on the pavement, empty-handed and utterly humiliated. The church congregation remained frozen in place. You could hear a pin drop in the backyard. Then the inevitable explosion occurred. Cameron marched back onto the patio, his fists clenched, his breathing heavy. His inherent entitlement was fractured, and he needed a target to absorb the blow of his catastrophic failure. He pointed a shaking finger directly at me. "You did this on purpose!" Cameron shouted, his voice cracking with rage. "You just had to sit there and radiate that intimidating, aggressive energy. You could not just stay out of the way like a normal, supportive sister. You had to show off and make the investors feel threatened." Aggressive energy. The classic thinly veiled terminology used to police black women who refuse to shrink themselves for white comfort. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, my face a mask of absolute calm. "I was eating potato salad, Cameron," I said smoothly. "I cannot help it if my resume is more intimidating than your entire business model." Right on cue, Chloe burst into theatrical tears. She dropped her plate of food and ran straight into the arms of our mother. "She ruined everything," Chloe wailed, burying her face in Valerie's shoulder. Cameron worked so hard on this presentation, he stayed up all night, and Zuri just sat there and sabotaged our future because she is jealous. She has always been jealous that I have a husband who is going to be a millionaire. Valerie wrapped her arms protectively around Chloe, shooting me a glare of pure, unfiltered venom. My father, Calvin, stormed over to my table, towering over me in a pathetic attempt to use his physical size for intimidation. "Look what you have done to your sister!" Calvin bellowed, his voice echoing for the entire church choir and deacon board to hear. "We opened our home to you. We allowed you to stay in the back unit out of the goodness of our hearts, and this is how you repay us. By tearing down a good man who is trying to provide for his family. You are a bitter, miserable woman, Zuri. You chase away every good thing in your life, and now you are trying to poison Chloe's blessings." I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles from my silk sundress. I looked at the audience of church members who were watching the scene with wide, judgment-filled eyes. I looked at my mother comforting the weeping golden child. I looked at my father red-faced and puffing out his chest. And finally, I looked at Cameron, who was glaring at me with a pathetic mix of rage and entitlement. If Cameron's brilliant business empire can be dismantled by me quietly eating lunch, I said, my voice carrying a crisp, ringing authority across the patio, then perhaps his business was not worth funding in the first place. I did not wait for their screaming rebuttal. I turned on my heel and walked with unbothered grace across the lawn, making my way back to my guest house. I closed the heavy reinforced steel door behind me and engaged the biometric lock. From the sanctuary of my command center, I brought up the exterior security feeds on my monitors. The festive atmosphere of the cookout had been completely eradicated. The church members were hastily packing up their covered dishes and gathering their children, whispering furiously among themselves as they shuffled out the front gates. The grand event my mother had orchestrated to flaunt her stolen wealth had ended in absolute public disgrace. Within an hour, the backyard was entirely empty, save for my parents Chloe and Cameron. I watched them pace back and forth across the pool deck. Chloe was still dabbing at her eyes with a napkin, while Cameron paced aggressively, waving his hands in the air as he complained to my father. Calvin was nodding emphatically, placing a reassuring hand on his son-in-law's shoulder. They were formulating a plan. They needed to regain control. They needed to punish the scapegoat to restore the natural order of their toxic hierarchy. I settled into my ergonomic chair and returned to my corporate emails, signing off on a multi-million-dollar merger while they stewed in their own manufactured misery. I knew they would not let the afternoon's humiliation go unanswered. It happened just as the sun began to dip below the Malibu horizon, casting long, dark shadows across the property. The heavy footsteps marching across the pool deck signaled his approach. Cameron did not bother to ring the bell. He pounded his fist aggressively against the reinforced steel door of my guest house. "Zuri, open this door right now," he demanded, his voice thick with unearned authority. I took my time. I saved my files, locked my primary monitors, and smoothed my dress before walking over to the entryway. I disengaged the lock and opened the door just wide enough to stand in the frame. Cameron stood on my porch, his chest puffed out, holding a crisp white piece of paper in his hand. Chloe was standing a few feet behind him on the grass, her arms crossed, a smug, vindictive smile playing on her lips. She had stopped crying entirely. This was their moment of triumph. Before I could even speak, Cameron shoved the piece of paper aggressively against my chest. I caught it before it could flutter to the ground. "What is this?" I asked, my tone utterly bored. "That is a formal 30-day eviction notice." Cameron smirked, his eyes flashing with malicious delight. "You pushed it too far today, Zuri. You disrespected me in my own home and you alienated my investors. Calvin and Valerie agree that your toxic presence is no longer welcome on this property." I glanced down at this paper. It was a generic eviction template printed off the internet, hastily filled out with a blue ballpoint pen. It demanded that I vacate the guest house, immediately, citing a breach of household harmony. Calvin and Valerie. I asked, raising an eyebrow. "My parents did not even sign this. Your signature is at the bottom." Cameron took a step closer, attempting to invade my personal space. Your parents gave me full power of attorney over the estate this afternoon. They trust me to manage their assets since you clearly have no respect for family. I am the legal administrator of this property now. He pointed a finger at the doorframe of my command center. We need this guest house. My new app is going to require massive server space, and your little consulting setup is in my way. You have 30 days to get your things off my property. It is time to pack Zuri. I looked at the cheap printed piece of paper in my hand. Then I looked at the arrogant white man standing on the porch of the estate that I owned free and clear. I did not rip up the paper. I did not yell. I carefully folded the fake eviction notice and slipped it into the pocket of my dress. I understand completely, Cameron, I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling calm. You want me to pack? I closed the heavy steel door right in his face, the mechanical lock clicking securely into place. I walked back to my desk, sitting down in the glow of my monitors. They wanted to play real estate moguls. They wanted to wield legal documents. It was time to show them what actual corporate warfare looked like. I held the cheap printed paper in my hand, smoothing out the crease Cameron had made when he shoved it against my chest. I did not crumble it. I did not march over to the main house screaming about my property rights. I walked with the deliberate, measured pace of an apex predator, perfectly aware that its prey had just willingly locked itself inside the cage. The heavy glass doors of the main house were wide open, letting in the cool evening breeze. I stepped into my own living room. The aftermath of the disastrous cookout was evident. Plastic cups littered my imported marble countertops, and half-eaten plates of food had been abandoned on the expensive side tables. But my family was completely unbothered by the mess they had made of my home. They were gathered around the custom sunken fire pit in the center of the living space. Calvin was swirling a glass of my premium cognac. Valerie was rubbing Chloe's shoulders, cooing soft words of comfort to soothe the golden child after her very public humiliation. Cameron stood by the wet bar, radiating a false bravado, as if handing me a piece of paper had somehow miraculously restored his shattered masculinity. I approached the fire pit and let the eviction notice flutter from my fingers. It landed softly on the glass coffee table right next to Calvin's drink. I looked directly at my father. "Did you authorize this, Calvin?" I did not call him Dad. The familial title felt entirely obsolete at this point. It had been obsolete for years, but today officially severed the tie. Calvin set his cognac down. He looked at the paper and then looked up at me. His jaw set in a hard, stubborn line. He adjusted his posture, attempting to physically dominate the space by spreading his arms across the back of the sofa. "Yes, I authorized it," he said, his voice booming with unearned authority. "And you will stop addressing me by my first name. I am your father, and you will show respect. Cameron is the man of the house now. We had a long discussion after the guests left. Your behavior today was unacceptable, Zuri. You intentionally humiliated your brother-in-law in front of his investors. You have created a toxic environment, and we cannot have that aggressive energy disrupting this family's new foundation." The man of the house. I repeated the phrase, letting the absolute absurdity of it hang in the air. You authorized a 30-day eviction notice for me so the man of the house can have server space for a non-existent company. Chloe lifted her head from Valerie's shoulder. Her eyes were red and puffy, but her glare was full of absolute venom. "He needs that space to rebuild Zuri," she snapped. "Not that you would understand what it takes to build a real legacy. You just want to see him fail because you are bitter and alone." Calvin held up a hand, silencing Chloe. He wanted to deliver the killing blow himself. He leaned forward, resting his heavy forearms on his knees. "We had to make hard choices, Zuri. We sold our home back in the city to pay off Cameron's legal debt. $800,000. He was facing federal prison for embezzlement because of a misunderstanding with an urban development fund. Chloe was crying every single night. Her husband was about to be taken away from her. We are a family that protects our own. We sacrificed our entire life savings to keep Cameron out of a cell and keep this marriage intact. We need this property. We need this beach house to be our new beginning. Cameron needs the guest house to launch his new platform and recover our investment. You need to respect his authority and pack your things." I stood perfectly still, letting his words wash over me. The sheer magnitude of their financial ruin was staggering, but it was not a tragedy. It was a masterpiece of poetic justice. They had liquidated their entire 30-year estate. Every dime of equity they had built over their entire lives had been handed over to a federal court to keep a mediocre white man out of prison. They had rendered themselves completely destitute and entirely dependent on the false belief that they had successfully commandeered my Malibu estate to serve as their permanent safety net. Valerie stood up, walking around the fire pit to stand next to Calvin. She crossed her arms, her face a mask of arrogant justification. "You have always been jealous of Chloe having a husband to take care of her," Valerie said, her voice dripping with condescending pity. "You have always resented that she found a man to lead her family while you sit alone with your computer screens. Do not ruin this for her just because you are miserable, Zuri." Cameron made a small mistake with his last company, but he is a visionary. Your father and I did what parents are supposed to do. We stepped up. We secured this beautiful home for our family's future. You are single. You have no dependents. You can easily rent a small apartment downtown. It is time for you to step aside and let your sister shine. I looked at my mother, processing the depth of her internalized racism and misogynoir. She was standing in my house praising a white man who had literally stolen nearly $1 million from an urban development fund, praising him as a visionary who simply made a mistake. Meanwhile, she was looking at her own black daughter, a woman who had legally and ethically built a multi-million-dollar corporate empire, and dismissing me as a miserable spinster who needed to vacate her own property to accommodate a criminal. I shifted my gaze to Cameron. He was leaning against the wet bar, a smug, victorious grin plastered across his face. He truly believed he had won. He had successfully manipulated my parents into bankrupting themselves to save his own skin, and now he thought he had successfully weaponized them to steal my property. He thought his forged power of attorney and his fake internet eviction notice actually held legal weight. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I did not even blink. I processed the precise numerical value of their destruction: $800,000 owed to an urban development fund. My mind instantly cross-referenced the massive financial acquisitions my firm had executed over the past fiscal year. Obsidian Holdings had recently purchased an extensive portfolio of distressed debts from several mismanaged urban development funds across the state. We bought the debt for pennies on the dollar to leverage the underlying commercial assets. The realization was so flawlessly perfect that it almost felt orchestrated by a higher power. My firm owned those subsidiary debt portfolios. I looked back at my father, my expression carved from solid ice. "You sold your home to pay an $800,000 embezzlement debt for him." I asked, my voice a low, smooth whisper that commanded total silence in the room. "Yes," Calvin said, lifting his chin defiantly. "Because that is what real families do. We protect our legacy." "That is fascinating," I replied. I did not offer another word. I did not explain why it was fascinating. I did not point out the irony of him claiming to protect a legacy while actively destroying his own. I simply turned on my heel and walked out of the main house. The cool ocean breeze hit my face as I stepped back onto the pool deck, but I did not stop to enjoy it. I walked directly to my guest house, the heavy reinforced steel door locking securely behind me with a sharp mechanical click. I sat down at my command desk and woke up my primary monitors. The glowing screens illuminated the dark, soundproof room. I pulled out my secured encrypted phone and navigated to my executive contact list. I bypassed the standard legal department and went directly to the Senior Vice President of Asset Liquidation for Obsidian Holdings. I pressed call. It rang exactly once before he answered. "Ms. Williams." His voice came through crisp and immediate. "I need you to pull the acquisition files for the Urban Development Fund portfolios we absorbed last quarter." I instructed, my fingers flying across my own mechanical keyboard as I spoke. "Search the debtor index for a man named Cameron Hayes. I want the complete ledger on an $800,000 restitution payment processed within the last 60 days. Locate the exact subsidiary holding that paper. Consider it done, Ms. Williams. Do you want me to flag the account for standard review?" "No," I said, a slow, lethal smile finally breaking across my face in the dark room. "I want you to prepare the absolute maximum asset freeze protocols across all associated accounts. Initiate Phase 1 of the corporate demolition. I ended the call and set the phone face down on the polished desk. They wanted to play real estate moguls. They wanted to weaponize their fake authority to cast me out into the street. They had absolutely no idea that the very ground they stood on, the very debt they had bankrupted themselves to pay, and the very future they thought they had secured all belonged entirely to me. I did not need to lift another finger for the next 48 hours. I simply sat back in my ergonomic chair, sipping green tea and watching the automated algorithms of Obsidian Holdings execute Phase 1 with lethal efficiency. Corporate demolition is not a loud process. It happens in the dark through encrypted networks and automated compliance triggers. When my acquisitions team flagged Cameron across the global financial index, they did not just find his $800,000 embezzlement debt. They found the fragile, interconnected web of digital wallets and shell accounts he was using to hide whatever liquid cash he had left. It took my security software less than 3 minutes to file a series of anonymous, automated, suspicious activity reports to the Federal Exchange Compliance Boards. By Tuesday morning, the consequences manifested in real time. Through my exterior security feeds, I watched Cameron pacing frantically around my saltwater infinity pool. His face was flushed, a violent shade of red, and he was clutching his phone so tightly his knuckles were white. He was screaming at a customer service representative, barking about his crypto portfolios being frozen pending a federal review. He kicked a luxury deck chair, sending it skidding across the wet tiles. He had no cash flow. The invisible noose had officially pulled tight. 2 hours later, Chloe returned to the estate. I watched her pull her white Tesla aggressively into the driveway, nearly clipping the stone retaining wall. She threw the car door open and stomped up the walkway, carrying exactly 0 shopping bags. This was highly unusual for a Tuesday afternoon, which she typically spent draining my parents' remaining credit limits at high-end retail stores on Rodeo Drive. I tapped into the foyer audio feed just as she slammed the front door shut. She threw her keys onto the marble console and let out a shriek of absolute indignation. "Cameron," she yelled, her voice echoing up the glass staircase. "My platinum cards just declined at the Prada boutique." The cashier actually cut the card in front of me. She said the bank flagged the entire family trust for fraudulent exposure. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was to walk out of that store empty-handed while the entire staff watched me? Cameron hurried into the foyer looking completely panicked. He tried to shush her, looking around nervously, as if the walls were listening. They were, of course. I was capturing every single word on a secure server. It did not take long for Chloe to deduce who might possess the digital capability to cause this level of financial paralysis. 10 minutes later, she was marching across the pool deck, marching directly toward my guest house. She pounded on the reinforced steel door. I disengaged the biometric lock and let the door swing open, stepping back to my command desk. Chloe stormed into my operational center, her face twisted in a mask of ugly, unwarranted rage. "You did this," she spat, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "You are behind this, Zuri. You hacked our accounts." I kept my eyes fixed on my primary monitor, analyzing a stock ticker. "I am currently working, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling calm. "I highly suggest you lower your voice and exit my workspace immediately." "You have always been a spiteful hacker," Chloe shouted, stepping further into the room and invading my professional sanctuary. "Ever since high school, when you used to bypass the school networks, you have always used your little computer tricks to ruin things for normal people. You are so bitter that Cameron is the man of the house and that Dad respects him more than he will ever respect you. You could not stand seeing me happy, so you froze our accounts. Fix this right now, or I'm calling the police and telling them you are committing cyber terrorism." Her absolute delusion was staggering. She was standing in the command center of a corporate titan, threatening me with local law enforcement over credit cards she did not even pay for. "You are deeply misinformed," I replied slowly, turning my chair to face her. "I do not need to hack anything. Your husband is a walking financial liability. The Federal Exchange flagged his accounts because his assets are tied to a massive embezzlement debt. Your cards declined because Calvin and Valerie drained their equity to bail him out, and the banks finally caught up to his fraudulent shell game. Now leave my property." Chloe let out a scream of pure visceral frustration. She lunged forward, reaching across my desk. She aimed her hands directly at my primary encrypted laptop, intending to smash it to the floor. She never even made contact with the casing. My reflexes were honed by years of martial arts training and high-stress tactical conditioning. I shot out of my chair and caught her wrist in midair. My grip was an iron vice clamping down on her delicate bones with terrifying speed and icy precision. The sudden, abrupt halt of her momentum caused her to gasp in shock. I twisted her wrist just slightly, forcing her to bend backward over the desk to relieve the pressure. "Do not ever touch my property," I warned, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of an absolute threat. "I am not the quiet teenager you used to bully in our parents' living room. I will snap your wrist and bill you for the medical expenses. Do you understand me?" Chloe stared at me, her eyes wide with sudden, genuine terror. She had never faced physical resistance from me before. She nodded frantically, gasping for breath. I released my grip, shoving her arm away with a flick of my wrist. She stumbled backward, rubbing her arm, her arrogant facade completely shattered. "Get out!" I commanded, pointing toward the open door. She scrambled out of the guest house, sprinting back across the patio toward the safety of my parents. I locked the steel door behind her, smoothing my jacket and sitting back down at my desk. The physical confrontation was merely a distraction. The real devastation was arriving by mail. I pulled up the front gate security camera. Right on schedule, a white delivery truck pulled up to the estate mailbox. The carrier deposited a stack of envelopes and one very distinct, thick, certified parcel. I waited exactly 15 minutes. On the interior foyer camera, I watched Valerie walk to the front door and retrieve the mail. She sifted through the envelopes, her face tight with the residual stress of Chloe and Cameron complaining in the living room. She paused when she saw the certified letter addressed to Calvin, bearing the official seal of the local homeowners association. I turned the audio feed up to maximum volume. Valerie tore open the thick envelope. She pulled out a multi-page document printed on heavy bond paper. She read the first paragraph. She blinked and read it again, bringing the paper closer to her face. A piercing, guttural scream ripped out of her throat, echoing violently through the high vaulted ceilings of the main house. "Calvin," she shrieked, her voice cracking with raw panic. "Calvin, get out here right now." My father rushed into the foyer, followed closely by Cameron and Chloe. "What is it?" Valerie Calvin demanded, grabbing her by the shoulders. "What happened?" Valerie thrust the papers into his chest, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "The Homeowners Association. Calvin, they just slapped us with a $25,000 fine. They are threatening to place an immediate lien on the property." Calvin grabbed the document, his eyes scanning the aggressive legal text. "A fine for what?" he bellowed. "For unauthorized, non-permitted structural renovations." Valerie sobbed, pointing an accusing finger at Cameron. "For the walls Cameron knocked down in the Ocean View office to build his server room. The association says the structural integrity of the property was altered without an approved architectural review, and they are demanding $25,000 by Friday, or they will initiate foreclosure proceedings." Cameron took a step back, his hands raised defensively. "It was just non-load-bearing drywall," he stammered. "I needed to run the cooling pipes for the crypto rigs. I was adding value to the property, Calvin. I swear it is just a misunderstanding with the zoning board." "Adding value!" Calvin roared, his chest heaving with sudden, uncontainable rage. "We gave you our life savings to keep you out of federal prison. We have less than $12,000 left in our liquid accounts. Where are we supposed to get $25,000 by Friday, Cameron?" Chloe rushed to her husband's defense, grabbing his arm. "Stop yelling at him, Dad. He's trying his best. We can just put it on one of your credit cards until the app launches." "The credit cards are frozen!" Valerie cried out, sinking onto the marble staircase. "The bank flagged the entire trust this morning because of Cameron's debt profile. We have absolutely no access to credit and no cash. If we do not pay this fine, we are going to lose the house. We will be out on the street." I sat in my guest house, sipping my green tea and watching the absolute chaos unfold on my monitors. I was the president of that homeowners association. I had expedited the fine myself, utilizing the strict community bylaws I personally drafted when I acquired the estate. Cameron had ripped out imported Italian acoustic paneling to install cheap cooling pipes, and the penalty for damaging luxury community aesthetics was severe. The financial chokehold was now completely inescapable. I stepped out of my guest house the following morning and walked toward the main estate. The ocean breeze was crisp and cool, contrasting sharply with the suffocating atmosphere of pure panic radiating from the sliding glass doors of my living room. I carried my ceramic mug of dark roast coffee, stepping silently onto the imported hardwood floors. I did not need to check my security monitors anymore. I wanted to witness this phase of the demolition with my own eyes. Calvin was pacing the length of the living room, holding the thick bond paper of the Homeowners Association notice. His heavy footsteps echoed off the vaulted ceilings. He was a man who had spent his entire life demanding respect based solely on his loud voice and his position as a church deacon. Now he looked like a cornered animal. He shoved the paper directly into Cameron's chest. "Read it again," Calvin commanded, his voice shaking with a terrifying mixture of rage and terror. "They are demanding $25,000 by Friday. They are explicitly stating that the destruction of the acoustic paneling violated the structural integrity codes of the entire coastal community. They are threatening an immediate lien on the property, Cameron. Do you understand what a lien means? It means they can take the house." Cameron did not even have the decency to look apologetic. He stood there in his expensive athleisure wear, running a hand through his hair and rolling his eyes. He let out a condescending sigh, looking at my father as if Calvin were a slow child who simply did not understand how the real world operated. "Calvin, you need to calm down," Cameron said, waving the heavy legal document in the air as if it were a fast food receipt. "You are overreacting. These homeowners associations are completely toothless. They are just a bunch of bored rich people looking for a bribe. Their bylaws are merely suggestions. I deal with local zoning boards all the time. I will just go down to their office, shake a few hands, and charm them into dropping the fine. It is just drywall. I was improving the property to maximize my server cooling efficiency. They should be thanking me." "Improving the property," Calvin roared, stepping closer to his son-in-law. His physical intimidation tactics, which had worked on me for decades, completely failed on Cameron. "You tore down walls without a permit. You brought the county inspectors to our doorstep. We have less than $12,000 left to our name. My accounts are frozen. Your accounts are frozen. If they execute this lien, we are out on the street. I demand you fix this immediately." Chloe rushed to stand between her husband and her father, holding her hands up defensively. "Dad, stop shouting at him." Chloe whined, her voice high and grating. "Cameron is a visionary. You cannot expect a tech founder to worry about petty community rules when he is building a financial empire. We just need to borrow the money from someone at the church until the accounts are unfrozen." Valerie had been sitting on the custom sofa, clutching a throw pillow to her chest. She looked up and locked eyes with me as I walked quietly toward the kitchen island. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, keeping my face an absolute mask of stone. The sight of my unshaken composure acted like gasoline on the open flame of my mother's panic. She shot up from the sofa and marched toward the kitchen, her face twisted in a familiar mask of bitter accusation. "This is your fault!" Valerie shrieked, pointing a shaking manicured finger directly at my face. "Do not stand there looking at us like that. You did this. You called the association and reported us, did you not? You could not stand seeing your brother-in-law take initiative. You could not stand seeing a man actually improve this house while you just sit isolated in your little back room." I set my ceramic mug down on the marble counter. The soft click of the ceramic against the stone was the only sound in the room for a fraction of a second. I looked at my mother, processing the sheer depth of her delusion. She was standing in a home she did not own, defending a white man who had systematically drained her entire life savings, and she was aggressively blaming her successful black daughter for the consequences of his illegal actions. "I am drinking my morning coffee, Valerie," I said, my tone perfectly level, dropping her title of mother completely. "I have not spoken to the neighborhood association board today. if Cameron decided to play unlicensed contractor and rip out structural components without a permit, that is a consequence of his own arrogance. It has absolutely nothing to do with me. You are a liar, Valerie gasped, clutching her chest as her breathing grew shallow and rapid. You have always been jealous of Chloe. You have always hated that she has a husband to protect her. We sacrificed everything, Zuri. We sold the family home. We emptied our retirement funds to pay off his legal debts so this family could have a fresh start. We gave up our entire safety net to secure this beach house, and you are trying to destroy it over a wall. We have $12,000 left. If they foreclose, we have nothing. We will be homeless. Valerie sank against the kitchen counter, spiraling into a full-blown panic attack. She was hyperventilating, her eyes darting around the luxurious kitchen as the reality of her self-imposed poverty finally began to crush her. She had traded her financial security for the illusion of status and the hollow promise of a golden child who had married a parasite. I felt absolutely zero pity. I watched her struggle to catch her breath, my posture relaxed and unbothered. They had demanded I vacate my own home. They had called me a miserable failure. They had gladly sacrificed my supposed stability to cater to a criminal. Experiencing the consequences of their own actions was not a tragedy. It was a mandatory life lesson. Cameron, seeing the total collapse of his in-laws, decided this was his moment to play the ultimate white savior. He puffed out his chest and walked over to the kitchen island, placing a condescending hand on Calvin's shoulder. He looked around the room with an unearned swagger soaking in the desperation of the black family he had single-handedly bankrupted. "Guys, relax," Cameron said, his voice dripping with smooth corporate arrogance. "You are panicking over nothing. I told you I am the man of the house now, and I handle the finances. You do not need to beg anyone at your church for money, and we certainly do not need to worry about some petty neighborhood association fine. We are sitting on a gold mine." Cameron reached into the back pocket of his expensive sweatpants and pulled out a folded legal document. He smoothed it out on the marble counter, tapping the paper with absolute supreme confidence. "Calvin, you gave me power of attorney over the estate yesterday afternoon," Cameron declared, smiling like a benevolent king addressing his loyal subjects. "You legally authorized me to act as your financial proxy. This beach house is a massive asset. It is easily worth $10 or $12 million in this market. We have incredible equity. I will just go down to the regional bank tomorrow morning, leverage the property, and take out a secondary mortgage." Calvin looked at the piece of paper, his eyes widening with a sudden desperate spark of hope. "You can do that?" Calvin asked, his voice trembling slightly. "You can get a loan against the house even with the frozen accounts." "Of course I can," Cameron scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "I have the signed authorization right here. The bank will process a cash-out refinance based on the property value. It will easily cover the $25,000 fine, plus it will give me the runway capital I need to finally launch my new application and get our primary accounts unfrozen. I will have a cashier's check in my hand by tomorrow afternoon. Problem solved." Chloe threw her arms around Cameron's neck, kissing his cheek loudly. "I told you, Dad," Chloe beamed, looking at Calvin and Valerie with triumphant pride. "I told you Cameron would take care of us. He is a genius. We are going to be perfectly fine." Valerie let out a long, shaky breath, wiping tears of relief from her eyes. She looked at Cameron as if he were a divine messenger sent directly from her church altar. "Thank you, Cameron," she whispered. "Thank you for stepping up and being the leader this family needs." I picked up my ceramic coffee mug, turning my back to the heartwarming display of shared delusion. I walked slowly out of the kitchen and stepped into the long, sunlit hallway leading back toward the patio doors. My back was turned to them, but if they could have seen my face, they would have been terrified. I was hiding a lethal, razor-sharp smile. Cameron was standing in my kitchen, proudly holding a piece of paper signed by my father, granting him power of attorney over an estate my father did not own. Tomorrow morning, Cameron was going to walk into a federally insured banking institution. He was going to present forged, fraudulent lease documents alongside a useless power of attorney. He was going to attempt to leverage a multi-million-dollar asset that legally belonged to Obsidian Holdings, a corporate trust that I completely controlled. He was not just going to fix their problems, he was going out of his way to commit textbook federal wire fraud and bank fraud in broad daylight. He was voluntarily walking straight into the jaws of a trap I did not even have to set. I pushed the heavy glass patio doors open and walked back toward my command center. I had an early morning phone call to make to my regional bank manager. I needed to ensure the authorities were waiting the moment Cameron walked through those double glass doors. I stepped into the cool quiet of my guest house, the heavy, reinforced steel door clicking securely shut behind me. The morning air was already warming up, but inside my operational command center, the climate control maintained a perfect, crisp temperature. I sat down at my expansive desk and woke up my primary monitors. The glowing screens illuminated the dark, soundproof room, casting sharp shadows against the acoustic paneling. I did not waste a single second. I picked up my encrypted private phone and navigated to my executive contact list, bypassing the standard commercial banking lines and dialing directly to the regional vice president of my financial institution, Mr. Sterling. The line rang exactly once before he answered, his voice crisp and professional. "Good morning, Ms. Williams," Mr. Sterling said immediately, recognizing my secure number. "How can I assist Obsidian Holdings today?" "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured and conversational, as if we were discussing the weather rather than orchestrating a federal trap. "Within the next few hours, a man named Cameron is going to walk into your flagship branch. He will be attempting to secure a secondary mortgage and a cash-out refinance against my Malibu estate." There was a brief pause on the line as Mr. Sterling processed the sheer absurdity of the statement. "Your private residence, Miss Williams. The property owned entirely by your corporate trust." "Exactly," I said, a slow, lethal smile spreading across my face. "He is going to present you with a power of attorney document signed by a man named Calvin. Calvin is my father, but he has absolutely zero legal claim to the property. The document is completely fraudulent. Cameron will also likely present fabricated lease agreements that my mother drafted to make it appear as though they are the rightful homeowners." "I understand completely, Ms. Williams," Mr. Sterling said, his voice dropping into a serious, authoritative register. "This is an attempted bank fraud and federal wire fraud scheme. How would you like us to proceed? Do you want security to turn him away at the door?" I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, steepling my fingers together. "Absolutely not," I instructed smoothly. "I want you to welcome him with open arms. I want you to assign him to your most senior loan officer. Offer him premium coffee, validate his ego, and let him submit every single piece of forged documentation he brought with him. I want him to sign his name on the federal loan application, thereby committing the crime in broad daylight. While he is doing that, I want you to contact the local authorities and have them waiting quietly in your lobby." "Consider it done, Ms. Williams," Mr. Sterling confirmed with ruthless efficiency. "We will secure the fraudulent documents the moment he hands them over, and we will have law enforcement standing by to execute the arrest on your command." I thanked him and ended the call, setting the phone face down on the polished desk. The trap was set, and the jaws were locked open. All the prey had to do was walk inside. 2 hours later, I watched the live high-definition security feeds as Cameron prepared to leave the estate. He strutted out the front doors of the main house dressed in a sharp-tailored navy suit that my parents had undoubtedly paid for. He held a sleek leather briefcase tucked under his arm, looking every bit the confident tech visionary he pretended to be. He slid into his white Tesla, the tires crunching aggressively against my stone driveway as he sped off to secure his stolen fortune. My mother stood on the front porch, waving him off with a look of absolute adoration, completely blind to the reality that she had just sent her golden son-in-law directly to his own execution. I locked my workstation and walked out to the patio to inspect the pool filtration system, needing a moment of fresh air before the final act commenced. The morning sun was reflecting brilliantly off the saltwater infinity pool. Chloe spotted me almost immediately. She marched across the wooden deck holding a freshly poured mimosa, radiating an utterly unwarranted sense of triumph. She leaned against the outdoor kitchen counter, intentionally blocking my path back to the guest house. "Cameron is securing our future today," Chloe announced, swirling her drink with a smug, entitled grin. He is at the bank right now handling the adult business you were too spiteful to assist with. He is taking out a massive equity line to pay the fines you caused, and there is going to be plenty left over to fully fund the launch of his new application. I looked at my younger sister, my face an absolute mask of stone. Is that right? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Yes, it is, Chloe sneered, taking a step closer to invade my personal space. And once the funds clear, the very first thing he is doing is initiating legal eviction proceedings against you. You are going to be homeless by Friday, Zuri. We are reclaiming the guest house for his server farm, and Mom and Dad are in full agreement. You have been riding our coattails for too long, pretending your little internet consulting gig makes you special. Maybe you can go back to waiting tables downtown like you did in college. I hear they are always looking for bitter single women to work the night shift. The absolute audacity of her words was mesmerizing. She was a black woman willingly weaponizing the labor of our youth against me, entirely comfortable tearing down her own sister to elevate a mediocre white man who had drained our parents dry. She had been so conditioned by our parents to worship his proximity to whiteness and his false promises of wealth that she could not even see the reality of her own pathetic situation. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my empire or inform her that her husband was currently committing a federal crime. I simply tilted my head, observing her with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a deeply flawed specimen. I waited tables to pay for my own college tuition because our parents spent my education fund bailing you out of your failed gap year in Europe, Chloe, I replied, my voice slicing through the ocean breeze like a freshly sharpened blade. The difference between us is that I actually built an empire with my bare hands. I created wealth. You just married a parasite and convinced yourself you achieved something. Chloe gasped, her face flushing a deep mottled red with sudden violent rage. You are just jealous, she spat, her voice cracking. You are jealous that Cameron is a provider and that Dad respects him more than he will ever respect you. You are going to be packing your bags by the end of the week. I did not give her the satisfaction of a response. I simply walked right past her, the silk of my blouse brushing against her shoulder, as I made my way back to the guest house. I had a very important phone call to take, and I refused to miss it. I entered my command center and engaged the heavy biometric deadbolt. I sat down at my desk and watched the digital clock on my primary monitor. The seconds ticked by with agonizing perfection. At exactly 11:15 in the morning, the encrypted private line on my desk began to ring. It was the direct line from Mr. Sterling. I answered on the first ring, pressing the speakerphone button so the audio would fill the soundproof room in crystal clear high definition. Ms. Williams. Mr. Sterling's voice came through crisp, professional, and tight with anticipation. I am listening, Mr. Sterling, I replied, leaning back in my ergonomic chair and resting my hands on the cool surface of my desk. I am calling to confirm that there is a man sitting in my office right now attempting to leverage your corporate asset, Mr. Sterling stated formally, ensuring every word was clearly documented. He has presented us with a power of attorney document that our legal team has already identified as completely fraudulent, along with a fabricated residential lease. He has signed the primary loan applications claiming ownership of the estate. I smiled, a slow, lethal expression that I reserved exclusively for the absolute destruction of my enemies. Is he still in your office, Mr. Sterling? I asked smoothly. Yes, ma'am, Mr. Sterling replied. He is currently waiting in the executive lounge for the final signature approvals. He believes the funds are being wired directly to his cryptocurrency exchange account as we speak. I also have the local authorities standing by in the lobby waiting for your final confirmation to proceed. I took a slow, deep breath, savoring the absolute pristine victory of the moment. Cameron had walked willingly into the bank, handed over forged legal documents, and signed his name to a federal crime, all because his unearned arrogance convinced him he was untouchable. He believed he could steal from a black woman and be celebrated for it. Yes, officer, I said, my voice dropping to a cold, commanding register, knowing the police were listening on the other end of the line. The man attempting wire fraud and bank fraud is sitting right in front of you. Arrest him. I ended the call with the bank manager and leaned back in my ergonomic chair. I had exactly 2 hours to prepare for the final act of this specific performance. I did not spend that time pacing or agonizing over what I had just done to my sister's husband. Instead, I walked into the private dressing room attached to my command center. This was no longer a family dispute over Sunday dinner. This was a corporate execution, and I required the appropriate armor. I selected a tailored charcoal suit with a razor-sharp cut, an outfit designed specifically to command absolute authority in boardrooms full of men who constantly underestimated me. I paired it with a crisp white silk blouse and black stiletto heels. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, flawless style that left no room for vulnerability. Finally, I walked over to my secure, fireproof safe and retrieved the heavy leather-bound corporate portfolio of Obsidian Holdings. Inside those thick pages rested the original deed to the Malibu estate, the certified corporate ownership structures, and the legally binding eviction notices I had prepared days ago. I laid the portfolio on my desk, poured myself a fresh glass of sparkling water, and waited for the show to begin. The tranquility of the coastal afternoon shattered exactly 120 minutes later. The piercing wail of police sirens tore through the quiet upscale neighborhood, echoing violently off the ocean cliffs. From my high-definition security monitors, I watched the spectacle unfold in real time. It was not just a single patrol car responding to a standard fraud call. The bank had escalated the situation due to the sheer dollar amount Cameron had attempted to secure. 3 distinct police cruisers turned sharply off the Pacific Coast Highway and tore up my private driveway. Their tires screeched against the pristine stone pavers, and the flashing red and blue emergency lights bathed the front of the main house in a chaotic, frantic glow. The heavy glass doors of the main house flew open. Chloe sprinted out first, her bare feet slapping against the concrete, her face contorted in absolute terror. Valerie and Calvin were right behind her. My father had a linen napkin still clutched in his hand, clearly interrupted in the middle of enjoying a luxury lunch he believed Cameron was currently paying for. My mother stood on the front porch, clutching the collar of her expensive cardigan, her eyes wide with uncomprehending shock. 2 uniformed officers stepped out of the lead cruiser. They walked around to the rear passenger side and opened the heavy door. Cameron was hauled out into the bright California sunlight. He was completely unrecognizable from the smug, arrogant tech visionary who had strutted off my property just hours earlier. His expensive navy suit jacket was gone. His tie was loosened and crooked. His face was a blotchy, terrifying shade of pale gray, and he was sweating so profusely his dress shirt was soaked through. His hands were securely locked in heavy metal handcuffs behind his back. The absolute reality of federal wire fraud had finally crushed his unearned ego. Cameron. Chloe screamed a blood-curdling shriek that echoed across the infinity pool. "What are you doing to my husband? Get your hands off him. He is a respected business owner." Chloe lunged forward toward the officers, but another patrolman quickly stepped into her path, holding up a stern hand to keep her at a safe distance. "Ma'am, I need you to step back and remain calm," the officer commanded, his voice carrying a no-nonsense authority. Valerie marched straight down the porch steps, her chest puffed out, completely blinded by her own delusion. She truly believed her status as a church matriarch and her assumed wealth could intimidate local law enforcement. She pointed a manicured finger directly at the lead officer's face. "This is a massive mistake," Valerie yelled, her voice shrill and trembling with aggressive indignation. "You have the wrong man. My son-in-law is a wealthy technology founder. He was just at the bank conducting routine financial business for our family. Release him this instant before my husband calls the chief of police. We are the owners of this estate, and Cameron had full authorization to be at that bank." Calvin stepped up right beside her, trying to use his physical size to back up her ridiculous claims. "Officer, I demand you uncuff him," Calvin barked. "I am the head of this household. I personally gave Cameron a signed power of attorney this morning. He was simply securing a secondary mortgage on our property. There is absolutely no fraud happening here. Whatever the bank teller told you is a complete and utter fabrication." The lead officer, a tall man with a hardened expression, did not flinch at their manufactured outrage. He calmly pulled a metal clipboard from his utility belt and looked down at the paperwork the bank manager had provided. He then looked back up at Calvin, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "Sir," the officer stated firmly, "your son-in-law was apprehended while attempting to secure a multi-million-dollar cash-out refinance." The bank manager flagged the transaction because the power of attorney document he presented was determined to be a complete forgery. Furthermore, the residential lease agreements he provided to the loan officer were completely fabricated. "That is a lie!" Chloe sobbed uncontrollably, clinging to Calvin's arm. "My dad signed that paper. It is his house. He gave Cameron the right to leverage it. Cameron is innocent." The lead officer let out a heavy, exasperated sigh. He flipped to the second page on his clipboard, tapping the paper with his pen. "Ma'am, I do not know what kind of scam you people are trying to pull today, but the property records are crystal clear. Calvin does not own this estate. None of you own this estate." Valerie gasped, taking a physical step backward as if the officer had just slapped her. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her confident facade cracking instantly. "Of course we own it. We just moved in. We sold our home in the city to buy this place." The officer shook his head, his expression shifting from suspicion to absolute pity. "Ma'am, this address is commercially registered. Calvin is not listed on a single municipal record. This property is owned outright by a corporate entity named Obsidian Holdings. The bank contacted the sole proprietor of that holding company while your son-in-law was sitting in the lobby. The actual owner explicitly confirmed that the documents were forged and requested we proceed with an immediate arrest for felony bank fraud." A suffocating dead silence fell over the driveway. The words hovered in the air, completely shattering the false reality my parents had built. Obsidian Holdings. The name meant absolutely nothing to Valerie, Calvin, or Chloe. They stared at the officer with blank, terrified expressions, trying to comprehend how their grand vision of coastal wealth had just evaporated into thin air. Cameron stood by the squad car, his head hanging down in total defeat, entirely unable to look his wife or his in-laws in the eye. He knew exactly what he had done, but he still did not understand who had caught him. It was time to educate them. I stood up from my command desk and picked up the heavy leather-bound corporate portfolio. I walked over to the reinforced steel door of the guest house and disengaged the biometric lock. The heavy mechanical click of the deadbolt releasing was sharp enough to cut through the quiet tension in the driveway. Every single head turned toward the guest house. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the blinding sunlight. I did not walk with the hesitant, shrinking posture my family had always expected from me. I walked with the lethal, flawless precision of a woman who controlled millions of dollars in corporate assets. The sharp lines of my charcoal suit contrasted violently with the casual beachwear my family was wearing. The rhythmic click of my stiletto heels against the stone pavers sounded like the ticking of a countdown clock. Chloe's mouth fell open. Valerie's eyes widened to the size of saucers, taking in my aggressive corporate attire and the sheer, unapologetic power radiating from my stance. Calvin simply stared, completely paralyzed, as the daughter he had just dismissed as an internet typist approached the scene like an executioner. I did not look at my mother. I did not look at my sister, who was shaking with fresh tears. I did not even look at the police officer standing guard over the criminal they had just apprehended. I walked directly past my stunned parents, closing the distance between the guest house and the flashing police cruisers. I stopped right in front of the lead patrol car, where Cameron was leaning against the hood in handcuffs. I looked at the white man who had arrogantly claimed my Ocean View office, who had stolen my vintage wine, and who had confidently tried to mortgage my property to fund his pathetic lifestyle. I raised the heavy leather-bound corporate portfolio of Obsidian Holdings. I held it in the air for a fraction of a second, ensuring every single person in the driveway saw the embossed gold logo on the cover. I dropped the portfolio directly onto the metal hood of the police cruiser. It landed with a deafening, echoing thud. The heavy thud of the leather-bound corporate portfolio hitting the metal hood of the police cruiser echoed across the driveway like a judge striking a final gavel. The sharp sound completely silenced the chaotic yelling. The flashing red and blue emergency lights reflected off the gold-embossed seal of Obsidian Holdings, shining brilliantly under the harsh California sun. The two arresting police officers instinctively took a half-step back. They looked at the impressive legal portfolio and then looked at me, sensing the massive shift in power that had just occurred on the pavement. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. I kept my hands resting lightly on the leather cover. I turned my head and looked my father dead in his eyes. He was still clutching that foolish linen napkin from his interrupted patio lunch. His chest was heaving as he tried to process the scene unfolding in front of him. "You did not sell your house to a random corporate buyer, Dad," I said. My voice was completely calm, but it carried across the concrete driveway with devastating, absolute clarity. "You sold it to Obsidian Holdings, my company." Calvin physically staggered backward as if an invisible force had struck him squarely in the chest. His knees buckled slightly, and he had to reach out and grab the side mirror of the police vehicle just to keep his heavy frame from collapsing onto the pavement. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The arrogant patriarch who had marched into my home just days ago, demanding my primary suite and lecturing me about being a team player, was completely paralyzed. He had signed away 30 years of home equity, 30 years of family memories, and his entire retirement safety net directly over to me. I was the faceless corporate entity he had bragged about outsmarting at the closing table. I was the wealthy landlord he had planned to defraud today. I did not give Calvin the grace of a single moment to recover. I turned my attention to the man in handcuffs. Cameron was leaning heavily against the rear door of the squad car. His expensive tailored navy suit was rumpled and soaked in a cold, terrified sweat. He looked absolutely pathetic. A mediocre white man who had coasted through his entire life on unearned privilege and the financial sacrifices of a black family he secretly despised. "And you, Cameron?" I continued, my gaze slicing right through his crumbling facade. "Did you really think your financial crimes just vanished into thin air? That $800,000 debt you owed to keep yourself out of federal prison? The restitution you were ordered to pay for embezzling from an urban development fund meant to help marginalized communities? You let my parents liquidate their entire life savings to cover your tracks because you thought you were too important to face the consequences of your own actions." Cameron swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his tight collar. The metal handcuffs clicked sharply as he shifted his weight, trying to avoid looking at my face. The police officers watched him closely, their hands resting near their duty belts. "You thought you beat the justice system," I said, stepping 1 inch closer to the police car. "But you did not pay the courts, Cameron. You paid the private debt collection agency that purchased your restitution mandate, and you owed it to a subsidiary of my firm. I bought your debt. I own every single cent of your financial liability. I am your primary creditor, and I am the one who authorized the freeze on your cryptocurrency accounts earlier this week." My mother let out a strangled, horrified gasp. She stumbled forward, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. "No," Valerie stammered, shaking her head violently in denial. "No, Zuri, you just do internet consulting. You are making this up. This is a mistake. You cannot possibly own this estate, and you cannot possibly own a corporate holding company." I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life minimizing my existence. "You heard Harrison Cole yesterday at your disastrous cookout, Valerie. You watched a Silicon Valley billionaire bow his head to me and thank me for saving his corporation. And yet your commitment to misunderstanding my success was so absolute that you convinced yourself I was just a low-level employee exaggerating my role. Your dedication to your own ignorance is exactly why you are standing on my driveway about to be homeless." The word homeless triggered a violent reaction. Chloe had been standing frozen near the edge of the lawn, watching her carefully constructed fantasy life burn to the ground in a matter of minutes. The realization that her white savior husband was a penniless felon and that her scapegoat sister held the keys to the entire kingdom broke whatever fragile grip she had left on reality. She could not handle the sudden inversion of our family dynamic. "You are a liar!" Chloe screamed. Her voice was a shrill, ear-piercing shriek of pure, unadulterated entitlement and blinding rage. You are a liar and a monster. Chloe lunged at me. She charged across the stone driveway, her arms outstretched, her manicured hands curled into claws aiming directly for my face. She fully intended to physically attack me right in front of active law enforcement. She wanted to punish me for shattering the delusion that had protected her entire existence. She never even made it within 3 feet of my tailored suit. The lead police officer moved with incredible tactical speed. He stepped squarely into Chloe's path, intercepting her charge before she could reach me. He grabbed her firmly by the shoulders and spun her around, forcing her back against the side of the second patrol car. "Stand down right now!" The officer barked, his voice booming with absolute unyielding authority. "If you take one more step toward this woman, I will place you under arrest for attempted assault and obstruction of justice. Do you understand me, ma'am? Back away from her immediately." Chloe burst into hysterical sobbing, thrashing weakly against the side of the police cruiser. She looked over at Cameron, begging him to do something to fix the situation, but Cameron just stared at the ground, completely broken and silent. The golden child was experiencing her very first encounter with genuine, inescapable consequences, and the shock was tearing her apart. Valerie rushed over to Chloe, wrapping her arms around her weeping daughter, glaring at me with a hatred so deep it was almost tangible. I watched my sister weep against the side of the police car, feeling absolutely nothing but mild boredom. The theatrics were exhausting, but the execution of my plan was flawless. I calmly reached into the interior pocket of my charcoal blazer. My fingers brushed against a small, cool object waiting perfectly in place. I pulled out a sleek silver flash drive and held it up between my index and middle finger. The sunlight caught the metallic edge of the drive, making it gleam. I turned my attention back to the lead officer, who was keeping a watchful eye on Chloe and her erratic movements. "Officer," I said, my voice perfectly smooth, cutting effortlessly through the sounds of my sister's frantic crying and the low hum of the police cruiser engines. "Since you are already processing him for attempted bank fraud and federal wire fraud today, I believe you will find this highly relevant." I extended my arm and offered the silver flash drive to the policeman. He took it cautiously, looking at the small metal device, and then looking back up at me with professional curiosity. "Here is the 4K high-definition security footage of Cameron picking the lock to my climate-controlled wine cellar and stealing a rare $5,000 bottle of vintage Bordeaux last week," I stated clearly, ensuring the entire driveway heard the accusation. I believe that adds felony residential burglary and grand theft to his growing list of charges. The lead officer took the flash drive from my hand with a sharp nod of acknowledgement. He slipped it into his tactical vest pocket and signaled his partner to secure Cameron in the back of the squad car. Cameron tried to speak, his voice a pathetic, raspy whine, but the officer firmly pushed his head down and shoved him into the back seat. The heavy door slammed shut with a finality that made my father flinch. I turned away from the police vehicle and directed my attention entirely to my parents. Calvin and Valerie were standing on the driveway, their expensive resort wear looking absurd against the backdrop of flashing police lights and impending homelessness. I reached out and rested my hands on the leather cover of the corporate portfolio I had dropped onto the hood. I slowly unclasped the brass lock. The crisp sound cut right through the heavy ocean air. I flipped the portfolio open and pulled out a single sheet of heavy bond paper. It bore the official watermarked seal of Obsidian Holdings. I held the document out toward my father. Calvin just stared at it, his arms hanging uselessly by his sides. "Take it, Calvin," I commanded, my voice devoid of any warmth. "You wanted paperwork to prove your dominance in my home. Here is your paperwork." Calvin extended a trembling hand and took the document. His eyes darted across the legal text. He read the bold printed header, and all the remaining color completely drained from his face. It was a formal 24-hour notice to vacate the premises. I stepped closer, invading his space just as he had invaded mine for my entire life. "That is a legally binding eviction notice," I stated, enunciating every single syllable. "You are being officially removed from this property for extreme breach of corporate lease agreements, unauthorized structural destruction, and harboring an active felon. You have exactly 24 hours to remove your personal belongings from my estate. If you are still standing on this pavement by tomorrow afternoon, I will have my private security contractors physically remove you for trespassing." Valerie let out a sound that was half gasp and half wail. Her knees literally gave out. She collapsed onto the pristine concrete driveway, the fabric of her expensive floral sundress pooling around her legs. She threw her hands over her face, sobbing with a frantic, hysterical energy that she usually reserved for the front pew of her church. "Zuri, you cannot do this," Valerie shrieked, looking up at me with tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. "We are your parents. We gave you life. We raised you. We sacrificed everything to make sure you girls had a future. You cannot put us out on the street. We sold the house. We gave Cameron all of our retirement money. We have absolutely nothing left. You cannot abandon your own flesh and blood." I looked down at the woman weeping on my driveway. This was the same woman who had spent 33 years minimizing my accomplishments. The same woman who had forced me to park on the public street so a group of mediocre tech bros could use my private gates. The same woman who had happily handed over her entire life savings to a white man who saw her as nothing more than a convenient bank. She expected my biological connection to override my sense of self-preservation. She expected the black daughter to automatically absorb the trauma and financial ruin created by the golden child. I looked at my mother, my expression absolute ice. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. I felt only the supreme clarity of a woman who had finally excised a tumor from her life. "On the very first night you got here," I said, my voice eerily calm, ringing out clearly over her dramatic sobbing. "You stood in my foyer drinking my champagne, and you told me that if I did not like how things were run in my own home, I could pack my bags and find somewhere else to live." Valerie choked on her tears, her eyes wide with the horrifying realization that her own arrogant words had just sealed her fate. I took one deliberate step back, gesturing broadly toward the Pacific Coast Highway running past the security gates. "I highly suggest you start looking." From the back of the squad car, muffled shouting erupted. Cameron was pressing his face against the reinforced glass, yelling desperately. "Chloe, call the lawyer." He screamed, his voice barely penetrating the thick windows. "Call your dad. Tell him to wire the bail money. Get me out of here." The lead officer walked around to the driver's seat, completely ignoring Cameron's frantic demands. The engine roared to life, and the police cruiser slowly reversed down the driveway, taking the disgraced tech visionary away to a federal holding cell. Chloe did not chase the car. She did not pull out her phone to call a defense attorney. Instead, she spun around and turned her absolute venom directly onto the two people who had enabled her entire existence. She looked at Valerie sobbing on the concrete and Calvin staring blankly at the eviction notice, and she unleashed a torrent of vicious blame. "This is your fault," Chloe screamed, pointing an accusing finger at our father. "You told me Cameron was a genius. You told me giving him the house money was a safe investment. You completely ruined my life. How am I supposed to show my face at the country club now? My husband is a felon because you were too stupid to check the corporate property records. You promised me this beach house was ours." Calvin looked at his favorite daughter in absolute disbelief. "Chloe, we gave up everything for you," he stammered, his voice breaking. "We bankrupted ourselves to keep him out of jail because you begged us to save your marriage." "I did not ask you to make me homeless," Chloe shrieked, her face twisted in a mask of pure selfish fury. "You were supposed to be the man of the house. You were supposed to protect my future. Now I have nothing, and it is all your fault. I hate both of you." The perfect family was imploding right there on the sun-baked driveway. The unconditional loyalty they always bragged about was shredding itself to pieces the very second the money dried up. They were tearing each other apart like starving wolves fighting over a scrap of meat completely devoid of the grace and dignity they pretended to possess at their Sunday cookouts. I did not stay to watch the rest of the argument. The visual of their destruction was satisfying, but I had a multi-million-dollar firm to run. I turned my back on the screaming match, picked up my corporate portfolio, and walked calmly back to my guest house. Once inside, I made a brief phone call to my private security contractors. I authorized a 4-person team to arrive at the estate immediately. Their explicit instructions were to supervise the packing process and ensure my parents and sister did not damage or steal a single fixture from the main house as they vacated. The night passed in absolute silence inside my command center. I finalized 2 corporate mergers and drank a cup of imported herbal tea while the security team stood guard outside. The next morning, the bright California sun rose over the ocean, casting a brilliant light across my property. I stepped out onto the patio just as a cheap rented moving van rattled up the driveway. It was a stark contrast to the luxury vehicles they had arrived in. The security guards stood by with their arms crossed, watching closely as Calvin and Chloe dragged garbage bags full of clothes and hastily packed cardboard boxes out to the truck. They moved in total silence, the exhausting weight of their new reality crushing their arrogant shoulders. Valerie walked out of the main house carrying a single overnight bag. She saw me standing by the pool and broke away from the truck, walking slowly toward me. Her face was haggard, stripped of her usual heavy makeup, and she looked incredibly small. "Zuri," Valerie said, her voice shaking with a pathetic, desperate hope. "Please, we can fix this. I know we made mistakes, but we are still a family. We just wanted the best for everyone. We were trying to protect your sister, but we never meant to hurt you. If you just give us a little time, we can make it right." I looked at the woman who had happily handed my childhood over to a golden child and sacrificed my peace for a white man who despised us both. She did not want to make it right. She just wanted access to my bank accounts. I did not say a single word. I did not owe her an explanation or a goodbye. I simply looked her in the eye, stepped backward into the main house, and pulled the heavy custom oak door shut right in her face. The solid lock clicked into place with a definitive, satisfying snap. I walked over to the security panel on the wall and pulled out my phone. With 3 taps, I permanently wiped Calvin, Valerie, and Chloe from the gated entry system. I changed the perimeter codes, effectively erasing their existence from my property forever. I watched on the monitor as the cheap moving van slowly reversed out of the driveway, the iron gates swinging shut behind them, locking them out of my world for good. The estate was finally mine. The air felt incredibly light, cleansed of the toxic, suffocating presence they had brought with them. I walked straight past the grand staircase and headed toward the glass-enclosed wine cellar. I bypassed the standard bottles and reached for a pristine reserve vintage, a beautiful red that Cameron had thankfully not managed to steal. I uncorked the bottle, poured a generous measure into a crystal glass, and walked up to the master suite. I pushed open the heavy glass balcony doors and stepped out into the warm morning sun. The vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean stretched out before me, endless and completely unobstructed. I took a slow sip of the finest wine I owned, letting the rich, complex flavors settle on my palate. I leaned against the glass railing, closed my eyes, and absolutely savored the pure, undisturbed, and deeply hard-earned silence. The greatest lesson we can take from this story is that shared DNA does not obligate you to endure systemic abuse, disrespect, or financial exploitation. For too long, societal and cultural expectations have told women to shrink themselves to maintain family harmony, even at the cost of their own mental health and stability. However, true empowerment comes from recognizing your intrinsic worth and setting unapologetic boundaries. You do not have to rescue people who actively plot your downfall, nor do you need validation from those committed to misunderstanding you. True family is built on mutual respect, and sometimes your absolute greatest peace is found in walking away. Please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for more empowering stories of resilience, and share your own boundary-setting experiences in the comments below.